Greetings everyone, and welcome to the pre-race meeting for the St Croix 40 Winter Ultra. We are super excited to get everybody back together again this year and have a really fun night out in the woods.
We want to acknowledge that the St Croix State Park lies on the banks of the Gitche-Zibi in the traditional and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe and Oceti-Sakowin peoples. These people are not merely history. They are here today. They are thriving. They are in our communities, they're our friends, and they're our neighbors. And it's important to us that we pay respect to their elders, past and present.
All right, well, let's start with a quick overview of the course. The St Croix 40 is a single 40-mile loop all the way around St Croix State Park. You're going to begin your journey inside your sleeping bag, tucked away, and just like kindergarten nap time, you're going to have to all quiet down before I ring the starting bell. Now, once you're packed up, you're going to head north from the trail center and you're going to take an immediate left onto the Matthew Laurie Trail. From there, you're going to head to the far western edge of the park in a big loop that'll bring you back around to our checkpoint at mile 22. This mile 22 checkpoint is the site of your second gear check of the evening. You're going to be given 12 ounces of water that you need to bring to a boil before you're going to be allowed to leave. The checkpoint's also going to have some water for you to refill your bladders or your bottles. However, there's not going to be any other hot food or indoor facilities at the checkpoint, so plan accordingly. Now, from the checkpoint, it's back out on course heading east into the blowdown area of the park. This is a gorgeous area of the park, and if we have a cloudless night, you're going to be treated to a beautiful view of the stars. This final half is also home to the Crooked Creek Trail Loop. This is one of the very few portions of the course where there will be some two-way traffic. It's very important to follow all the course markings as you're in this section so that you don't end up doing some bonus loops. Once you leave the Crooked Creek Trail Loop, it's a straight shot back to the start-finish. However, keep your eyes open for course markings because there are various trails that intersect along this way back, and we don't want anybody getting confused and doing extra mileage that they don't need to do. The entire course is marked with our reflective stakes and our highly reflective arrows. Just keep your eyes open and you won't miss any turns. Once you reach the finish line, you're going to be greeted by our awesome volunteer team. They're going to give you your finish line medallion, and then you can head on inside after 3 a.m. for some breakfast. We're going to have an assortment of hot foods as well as some cold foods so that you can get some nourishment in you before you head on out.
Now that Jameson has introduced you to the course that you're going to see out there, we're going to review just a couple things to help keep you a little bit safer. We're going to very briefly touch on 3 conditions that are fairly common in ultras, and they're definitely some things you want to avoid. Those things are trench foot, frostbite, and hypothermia. Trench foot is so named because it's a condition that was seen very frequently by soldiers in World War I, standing in the trenches in cold conditions with their feet submerged and wet. When skin becomes wet and submerged, it becomes macerated, meaning that it gets squishy and wrinkly, and it's very easily damaged. In those conditions, that's where we often see things like blisters or skin can crack. It can start to slough off. All of those things when our skin is submerged for long periods of time. When it's also cold, healing is reduced. Our capillaries aren't working as well, and so that skin is not only soaking wet, it's also cold. Prolonged trench foot, meaning submerged or very wet skin at less than about 60 degrees for long periods of time, can result in the death of that skin. The best way to prevent trench foot is to keep your extremities warm and to keep them dry. A really easy way to do that is to keep some extra socks. Change them periodically if you think your feet are getting very wet or very sweaty. Many years trench foot isn't much of a problem, but every once in a while we'll have a year where it's a little bit warmer and there might be some standing water on the trail. Whenever you're in those conditions, be particularly cautious of conditions like trench foot. Treating and avoiding trench foot is really pretty easy. It's a matter of keeping your feet dry. This might come in the form of using something like a vapor barrier. Many participants swear by bread bags or swear by some kind of method that's going to keep their feet dry from the external moisture. Other participants may choose to use something like a desiccant, which could be diaper rash cream like Desitin. It could be a powder that helps to absorb some of that liquid. These are just a couple options that people use to help keep their feet dry and therefore keep things like trench foot from becoming a problem. Trench foot typically requires multiple days to set in, so it's not likely to be a problem at this event specifically, but it's something to be aware of as you consider doing longer efforts, and being aware of what your feet look like throughout the race is a pretty good idea for prevention. Now we're going to go over frostbite. Frostbite is a condition that results from exposure to extremely cold conditions. It sets in faster when skin is exposed. You'll frequently see it with participants if they have the tip of their nose exposed, their earlobes if they're sticking out from under their hat, sometimes on their cheeks. It can also happen on fingers and, more likely for cyclists, on their toes. When skin gets cold, it starts to turn red or pink. As it gets colder or the cold is prolonged, it'll start to turn white. And at this point, the skin might start to feel a little warm rather than being cold. At this point, we can still catch the frostbite before it becomes very dangerous. Once you've surpassed this point, the skin can begin to turn shades of blue, or it can even turn black. Once it has reached this point, irreparable skin damage has possibly occurred. The critical part to remember about frostbite is that if it sets in, attention and treatment need to happen immediately. Get inside, get warmed up, get yourself covered. Wiggle those fingers and toes, find a hand warmer, do whatever you can in order to rewarm those extremities. It is critical, if you have the onset of frostbite, not to go back out into the cold. When our cells, whether it's skin or other tissues, begin to freeze, they take damage. And once they've been warmed up, that damage needs to heal. If that damaged tissue, if that damaged skin freezes again, it can cause irreparable damage. Don't allow this to happen. It's critical that if you do suffer frostbite and you notice that white, blue, or black skin, gotta stop. The prevention of frostbite is all about warmth. Keeping your extremities warm, putting on extra layers if you need to, covering your skin. Many participants will use some kind of tape, whether it's medical tape, kinesio tape, there's an anti-frost tape, and they'll cover their cheeks and their nose, making sure that all of your gear is fitting properly. If you've needed to take off your gloves for any reason, double check and make sure that the skin around your wrists isn't exposed. Double check all of those points between your different layers to make sure your skin is covered. In addition to keeping skin covered, you want to keep your extremities moving, keeping your fingers flexing, keeping your toes moving. This can be really helpful in keeping blood flow going to those places. These issues are also why when we see frostbite in fingers and toes, it's frequently on cyclists. Since they're in a stationary position and they're not swinging their arms or flexing their feet when they walk, those parts can get really, really cold. So be prepared. Make sure that you have extra layers in case you need them. And some cyclists may find it beneficial to hop off and walk a little bit just to get those toes flexing a little. With frostbite, prevention comes from keeping your extremities warm and from keeping your skin covered. Under no circumstances should you continue if you have found the signs of frostbite. Come off course and seek medical attention immediately. Finally, we want to mention hypothermia. Hypothermia is a condition that sets in when the body becomes critically cold. It can happen quickly in colder temperatures, or it can happen more slowly depending on the conditions. But ultimately, hypothermia occurs when the body's core temperature gets at or below 95 degrees. Now, when you're out in these conditions, you might feel cold, and you can be cold for a long time before hypothermia sets in. But what we want to really pay attention to is how exactly our body is handling that cold. When we start to shiver, that's the first sign that whatever we're doing, whatever clothes we're wearing, it's not enough. As soon as you start shivering, if that's something you experience, do whatever you need to do in order to get warm. Whether that's doing some jumping jacks, or getting off of your bike and hiking for a while, or putting on your extra layer, that one you brought that you didn't think you would need, maybe you need it. Put on those extra layers. Do what you need to do to get the shivering to stop. Once you get that shivering to stop, you're probably in pretty good shape. Cold, wet gear can contribute to shivering. So if you discover that you're getting cold and you're shivering and you notice that you're wearing a lot of wet clothing, it might be a good opportunity to really layer up and make a plan once you hit the next checkpoint to get that wet clothing off and layer up with dry stuff. If the shivering is unaddressed, it can lead to other symptoms like slurred speech or confusion. At this point, hypothermia is setting in, and the individual needs help as soon as possible. Once hypothermia has reached this point, a person may be incapable of making good choices. They may begin to feel warm. They may start to take off their gear or begin to wander. They might forget that they're in a race at all. Because of the severe nature of hypothermia, it's really important that everybody in this race check in on each other. When you're passing by one another, say hello, ask how you're doing, and pay attention to their response. If somebody needs help, help them. If you need help, if you're shivering and you can't get it under control, reach out. Stop a snowmobile patrol. Ask somebody for help. Hypothermia-related confusion and memory loss has led a few ultra participants to get into great danger out in the wilderness. It has led them to no longer be able to make good choices, and eventually, severe hypothermia will lead to loss of consciousness and sometimes death. Fortunately, hypothermia is completely preventable. Dressing for the weather, and perhaps more importantly, dressing in layers, is a great way to prevent the effects of hypothermia. Being able to add or remove layers as you become warmer or cooler will help to keep your sweat in check, because once you begin to sweat, if that sweat cools or freezes, that can create hypothermic situations. Being able to add and remove those layers, or having spare dry layers, will help to keep you warm and safe out on the trail. Bringing too many layers is always preferable to bringing too few. It is far better to be hauling around that gigantic puffy jacket in your sled and never need it, than to go fast and light and find yourself out in the woods feeling the effects of hypothermia and have nothing to do about it. One additional tip for preventing hypothermia and for preventing getting cold in general is to always keep eating. When we eat, it increases blood flow to our internal organs that handle digestion, and all of that blood flow and all that activity helps to create warmth and heat in our body. As long as we're eating, you keep essentially a little furnace inside of you going. So just by keeping eating, staying on top of your calorie consumption, that can also help to keep your body a little bit warmer than it would be otherwise. Of the three issues I've covered here, hypothermia is by far the scariest and most dangerous. It's why races like this have really stringent gear requirements. It's why an insufficient bivy setup is unacceptable. It's really, really easy in bad conditions to get into a lot of trouble. It just isn't worth it. So ultimately, staying safe out on the trail during these winter ultras comes down to just a few basic concepts. Stay warm, stay dry, and look out for each other. Always check in, always see if they need help, and check in with yourself too, and be honest if you need assistance as well. No race is worth putting yourself at risk over. Be safe out there. We want to see you at the end.
So now let's go over some rules. First of all, we are guests of the park. So please respect all of the park property. Do not litter and pack out any toilet paper that you use. Next, safety is of utmost importance in winter ultras. That means you must always have all 3 of your blinking lights, 2 on the back, 1 on the front, visible at all times. They must always be on the most outer layer of clothing. Your reflective material also needs to be visible all the time. Snowmobiles are through the park going incredibly fast, and the last thing we want is for somebody to get hurt in a collision. Now, if for some reason you need to get into your bivy sack, do it off of the trail, but leave all of your blinking lights visible from the trail so that we can see where you are. The snowmobile patrols will be out monitoring how people are doing, but that means we need to see you if you have to get off the trail and bivy. Finally, this race is about self-sufficiency. That means that you can only receive help from volunteers and other racers on course. Any spectators that you come across or other people on the course are not allowed to assist you. Spectators are only allowed at start-finish and the checkpoint. So please tell your friends and family to plan accordingly. There is no vehicle traffic on most of the course. Now, if you break any of these rules, you'll be at minimum assessed a time penalty and you may be disqualified from the event. Please do not test us on these rules. Your safety is of paramount importance, and the future of winter ultras is at stake whenever we have an incident. Therefore, do your part and stay safe, stay aware, and help us continue to keep this sport going strong. Now, lastly, if for any reason you need to drop from the race and record a DNF, you must return to the trail center and let the timing folks and the finish line folks know that you are leaving the course. If you do not notify us that you are leaving the course, you will be banned from future events. The last thing that we need is to call out search and rescue to try and find somebody who's sitting in a nice warm hotel room who didn't tell us they were leaving. It is of utmost importance that you let us know where you are at all times. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching our pre-race briefing. We cannot wait to see everybody out there on course. This is a fun event and a great community, and we look forward to seeing you at the St Croix 40 Winter Ultra.